for those of you who don't know the voice of the woman behind, the wizard behind the curtain, that's Carrie Poser, the incomparable Carrie Poser, who is the executive director or president. Carrie, I'm sorry, I don't remember your title.
It's president, but
president. I always get mine too. Of the Wisconsin Balance of State Continuum of Care, and she is our expert on all things HUD and funding and advocacy and the million things that Carrie is involved in. And Carrie, welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just to make sure that everybody can see the blue screen, right? And it says ending homelessness and all that good stuff. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Also, just so that I'm aware of time, how long do you have me slated until? Just so that I stay within the confines of the time.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, gotcha.
Oh, okay. So is it till 11?
Yes, 11? You have it till 11 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. All right. I will just get started. So thank you, Cheryl. My name is Carrie Poser. I'm the president of the organization. I use the title COC director. It's fine, whatever. My job is to run the overall day-to-day operations of the organization that we call the Balance of State COC. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk through a variety of different things as it relates to your coalition, briefly talk a little bit about how it fits in the world, but then most importantly, look at your data and share with you what your data tells me from an outside perspective, looking at strengths, gaps, areas that could be improved, etc. I am happy to do questions throughout this thing. Now, this is Zoom, and I usually use GoToMeeting, but whoever can see questions or comments, please just interrupt me. I'm absolutely happy to answer them and appreciate them. It helps me know that you're following what I'm saying, and then you've even gone further and have additional questions. So whoever is watching that, please just let me know. That way I can pause or whatever I have to do in order to answer them. All right, so the first slide that's up on your screen, I will just jump in. So this slide is the Hearth Act. What the Hearth Act was, many of you may already know that. You've been in homeless services for a bit, but in 2009, there was a mortgage crisis that was occurring in this country, actually a little bit prior to that in 2008. As a result of that, Congress passed something called the Hearth Act. And it was part of a much bigger package that was designed to help provide a safety net for those people impacted by the mortgage collapse. But what it also did on the side was change up a bit of what we do as homeless service providers. It was signed into law in 2009, and it took a little bit to get going and see a lot of those changes kind of fall into place. So in 2011, for example, that particular year is the year that we saw a definition of homelessness come from HUD that was, I'm going to say, really clear and really complicated all at the same time. But that is a result of the statute that's sitting on the screen right now. The Hearth Act made that necessary. So it's important to look at that. And part of the reason that I look at that, I don't know if you guys have ever done the Strengths Finder, but one of my strengths, one of my things is that it's important for us to know where we came from to understand where we're going. And so for me, to be able to have this baseline that in 2009, this is when the world shifted, even if it took us a while to catch up, it's important for us to have that baseline common understanding of this is why we do some of the things that we have to do. So the Hearth Act told us that the COCs, so the COC defined as this big HUD system-y thing, are now charged with designing a local system.
Carrie?
Yes, ma'am.
I've got a request in the chat asking if your screen can be expanded. Jenna is saying you need to hit display settings on your black screen and hit flip screens. And this is the new me, so I'm just reading.
Okay. So I have it as show present. Okay. So let's see. There's a little black thing. I see the black thing. Share screen. Pause. Annotate. Remote. What do we got here?
Jenna?
I'm looking.
I know Jenna's giving direction here. So Jenna, what do you see?
Okay, go back, play your slide again, play your screen again.
Oh, okay. From the current slide, sure, got it. All right, next.
And on the black part where you can see next slide, like, are you have two screens up?
I do. The problem is with Zoom, I don't see my black screen
I see display
anymore.
settings at the top.
Okay.
So on the actual PowerPoint part, not on the Zoom part.
Yeah.
On the PowerPoint. Because we're seeing your presenting side versus the actual presentation side.
Oh, for gosh sake. Well, that's horrible. Don't do that.
Yep. So I just made this mistake yesterday. That's why I know this. So if you go to the display settings. Oh, shit.
Yeah. Hold on a sec. Now you're going to see a picture of my dog, I think. Okay. Yeah, the Zoom part has kind of messed up my world. Hold on one second. Okay, so let me get your floating faces over there, and then I will do this and see if that works. Is that better?
Nope, it's the same thing. So can you see the black part now, though?
No, I don't have that, so it's being, I don't know what the deal is. It won't show me that. Resume slideshow. It won't show me the black part. So my options here, I don't know why it's doing that. Give me a second.
I mean, I can see it. Can everybody else see it? Can we just continue with it or no?
Yeah, we just got a message in the chat. Someone asked if her screen could be expanded.
So what if I do this?
Was that better, Anne? Everybody else? That works, I think. As long as you can make that work, Carrie.
Yeah, I can make this work. Does this work for everybody? Can you see it? It should be bigger than some little tiny, because it's going to make charts really complicated if you can't see it.
Yep, I can see it. Can everyone else see better now? Okay, go ahead, Carrie.
Nodding? Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's doing that. All right, let me move this, whatever this is. Okay, Hearth Act, that's what I was talking about. Okay, COCs, yes. So COCs are charged with creating this local system. Back in the day, we called each of our local coalitions little COCs, not to confuse anybody, but the reality is that you're a coalition, we are the COC, this big, giant geographic area. And so because we're the recognized COC, we have to come up with a way to make it manageable. So the people that came before me, the people that came before, before me and a variety of other people back in the 2007-8 range, thought it was a good idea to create this balance of state continuum of care and to organize it by breaking down the 69 counties to cover 21 coalitions. Your coalition, the Brown Coalition, or whatever, however you name it, is one of those members to our coalition, or to our COC. Our COC is made up of 21 of these members, so you are one of 21. And within that local coalition, you are then tasked with having a system. And we're going to talk a little bit about a system here in a minute. And that's important because when we're looking at your data, it isn't just one agency that is contributing to the overall, data picture that we see. It's a system that we're looking at. So COCs are designed to, or required to, promote community-wide planning, strategic use of resources, enhanced coordination, and then you'll see there that it says improved data collection and performance measurements. Another big thing that happened in 2009 is that we took a switch here from agencies just doing their own thing to recognizing that we need to be a crisis response system where we are coordinated in our efforts. This started in 2009. It has continued to grow and develop along with the requirements to push us towards a coordinated system. It included the coordinated entry requirements back in 2009. Now, the balance of state didn't wrap its arms around coordinated entry until about 2014. But you'll see here that in the statute, it says to HUD, you can't fund COCs, big COCs. You can't fund them if they're not contributing to system performance. If you are not looking at system performance and making choices about which projects are enhancing those system performance metrics and those that are poor performers. That's a big piece of this 2009 legislation that is carried through to today. All right, next slide. Now I got to figure out the best way to go to my next slide. Oh, there. All right, next. There we go. What's a system? God, this is wonky. All right. So when we talk about systems, people have lots of different definitions. This is the definition that I use. It also segues back to what I think a coalition is and the beauty that coalitions, the beauty that they are and what they can be is tremendous. It harnesses a lot of power, and not just financial power, but the other kinds like influence and expertise that can be drawn together by bringing people together. And a system plays on that by taking all the little things that you're doing, right? All these different parts and bringing it together around one single purpose. So if your single purpose is to end homelessness, and you have the perspective of housing authorities and homeless service providers and domestic violence providers and outreach people and food pantries and faith-based community, and you have the perspective of all of these people, then your end product will be richer because of it, because you've brought together all these other sectors of the world that see things differently, that maybe have different perspectives. That is what truly creates this system. But you have to have some kind of circled around goal, right? And you have to have it be able to be articulated what that goal is. On the slide, there's two different examples of goals in our world. The first one is opening doors. So when Opening Doors was released by the United States Interagency Council, it is the federal strategic plan to end homelessness. And when that was announced, it said that the goal of this whole thing was to transform homeless services into crisis response systems that prevent homelessness and rapidly return people who experience homelessness to stable housing. And I draw your attention to the phrase rapidly return. This is a phrase that is going to continue starting back in 2009 and coming all the way to today. The idea of rapid return has shifted homeless services and the way that we view the role of different elements of the system. Now, the next one comes right out of Hearth. That's the 2009 legislation to establish a federal goal of ensuring that people who become homeless return to permanent housing within 30 days. That's an audacious goal. This isn't saying that people are going to be in shelter for 30 days. This is saying that people, from the moment that they experience the homeless episode to the moment that they're going to be permanently housed, we're going to spend less than 30 days. I mean, that's a significant goal that the federal government laid out there back in 2009. There's not a single coalition in the balance of state that is close to that at this point. But that doesn't change the fact that that is the federal expectation that we are working towards. All right. So then purpose. So the mission of our organization, the Balance of State Continuum of Care, is to end homelessness by supporting local coalitions throughout Wisconsin. I can't talk about ending homelessness if we don't talk about what that means. People have different belief systems around what ending homelessness would look like. Some people think it's not possible. Some people have a hard time conceptualizing what that would actually look like in regular life. So on the screen, you have the definition that we use. This is what our definition of ending homelessness, coming out of smarter people than me in this country, as what ending homelessness would look like. So ending homelessness means that every community will have a systemic response in place that ensures that homelessness is prevented whenever possible. And when we can't prevent it, it becomes a rare, brief, and non-reoccurring experience for that family or that household or that human. That requires communities to be able to quickly identify people, to intervene, to prevent the loss of housing, to divert people away from the front door of homelessness when it's safe and reasonable to do so. But when homelessness does happen, that there is an immediate access to shelter and crisis services while we're looking and helping the folks find permanent housing and tailoring the system around or circling around services to meet their needs, not asking them to meet our organizational needs. That is what ending homelessness is supposed to look like. And that is our quest to reach, right? We want to make sure that every one of the 21 local coalitions gets to this place. This would be our utopia situation here. So with that in mind, that this is what we are, this is what the goal is, this is what we're trying to move towards, there is a need in each coalition to make decisions, whether that's funding decisions, priority decisions, all kinds of decisions. And when we make those decisions, we want to have some kind of backup for it, right? Like, why are we doing this? And this particular slide lays out where what we're gonna talk about here, which is these different buckets of data that we can use and look at in order to make these kinds of data-based or data-driven decisions. So bucket number one is the point in time. I'm sure that most people on the call know what the point in time is. Happened a couple of weeks ago. In Wisconsin, we do it twice a year at the end of January. Generally, we do it at the end of July. As you all know, Wisconsin looks different in those two seasonal midpoints. And so to make sure that we are capturing a true snapshot of what the community looks like in both obviously cold and hot weather. There are, the point in time isn't perfect. The point in time doesn't tell us everything. That's why there's 5 buckets. But one thing it does do that no other data point does is that it has the ability for us to take into one number all the people that are unsheltered and all the people that are unsheltered at the same time into one number. It takes all the people that are accessing homeless services through HMIS, Homeless Management Information System, the database using agencies, and those that don't. It links up the Survivors of Domestic Violence Network for shelters and transitional programs. It has the ability to group all that together into one number. It's the only data point that we have that truly does that. And because we've been doing it back to 2015 in kind of the same methodological way, I think I just made that up, but using the same methodologies, we have some data that we can look back and be able to see trends, and we're gonna show some slides about that. The second bucket is inflow. Who is making it into your shelter system? Now, when I say that, who's making it in, to kind of unwrap that a little bit, all shelters have rules. All shelters have their criteria for who they allow in, but also your community has shelters for certain populations. And sometimes who we see into our shelter system doesn't always match exactly with who is actually homeless in a community. And that's a hard thing to wrap our minds around, but that's reality. And so by looking at and being able to look at, here's what the point in time says about who's unsheltered, here's who's entering our shelter system, but here's who's waiting in coordinated entry for access to services. Do those 3 data points make sense? Do they flow together? Or do we have a large unsheltered population that can't get into shelter and is showing up waiting for access in coordinated entry? So again, all the buckets aren't all gonna play nice together, but that is one where we can start to see and paint a little bit of a picture about what our system currently looks like. The other part of inflow is migration. You'll run into this often where folks think that the people that are homeless aren't our people. You know, they're not Brown County people. So the migration report shows, you know, this is who's coming into your system and this is who is leaving your system. And what does that tell us about the people that are experiencing homelessness within our system? The third bucket is looking at the total number of clients served with all HMIS projects over the course of a year. Now, this data point also fits in interestingly because you'll have the point in time, right? It tells us sheltered and unsheltered. You have who's making it into the shelter system. And then you have the programs that use HMIS, right? The housing programs. Do those all flow? Because then you also have coordinated entry, who is the people that are waiting. So does that all match up? That you have programming for the people that are actually homeless in your community in the right percentages and the right amounts to be reflective of the need? Or do you have programs that have been operating for a long time and they just are what they are, and maybe the need has shifted or changed or has grown in a way that the programming hasn't caught up? Those are all questions to ask and things to talk about as we walk through this. The fourth bucket is coordinated entry, which is the only data point that is live time, real time. Who is waiting for housing services? Who is homeless in your community? Whether or not they got into a shelter, doesn't matter. If they are waiting and they have been given an opportunity to enter, and I'm using air quotes that you can't see, the door to our coordinated entry system, as long as they have access, then they should be on the list regardless of where they popped up. And then the last bucket is system performance. I talked about it earlier that HUD looks at you as a system, as to how you are contributing to the total. So from a system performance perspective, there's multiple angles that we can look at to see progress or not progress in certain areas. So that's where we're going to step off here and start walking down this path of the buckets. I'm going to pause for just a second, first to drink some coffee, but second to give a chance if there are any questions. I will happily take them.
None have come up in the chat yet. Does anyone have any questions to this point?
Yeah, I have one that came up earlier. Sorry, Paul with the Green Bay Police. Just wondering on when you said 30 days is a time frame that the system operates under, but no one was achieving that. What would you say is the average? Is it 60 days, 90 days? What is the average that you're seeing out there from other coalitions?
Sure. And I can preview by saying that yours is mid-range. You're sitting at about 44 days in shelter. That's not including the time prior to shelter or the time after shelter seeking housing, but the shelter average length of time is about 44 days. And I'm going to show you a slide that compares you to other similarly situated communities. And so we are going to look at that. I hope that helps. That's like a preview, but that's part of what I did towards the end, is that I wanted to make sure that I stacked you up with other communities, because it's one thing to talk about this is what Brown County is, and then I talk about where you've been, but then where do you fit in like, are we ahead of the curve? Are we behind the curve? So yes, we will get there, I promise. Perfect. Okay. All right, we're gonna jump in to point in time. All right, everybody can see that okay? I think, there we go. All right, so this is Brown Coalition numbers for 2019 and 2020. Obviously, I don't have 2021 quite done yet, but here is what this tells us. The top chart is January of 2019. And then this is the summer count in July of 2019. And then January 2020. And then I don't have a July 2020 because we didn't do a systematic count. Because of COVID, we allowed communities to decide how they wanted to do some kind of strategic outreach. So I don't have a chart for that. So what does this tell us? Well,
Carrie, just
yes.
to clarify, when you say for these numbers we're looking at,
yep.
Are we looking at Brown? Sorry, I didn't see down in the corner. Never mind. I apologize.
Nope, it's totally fine. Yep, Brown Coalition. So I'm going to make sure that we all have the same definitions in mind so that we're talking about this the right way. Total households. So this is not number of people in households. This is just household units. The total number of people that were unsheltered. This is people, not households. The number of veterans, the actual number of people. Chronic homeless households, and then youth households. Youth households could be one of three categories. This includes the young adults that are age 18 to 24. This includes parenting youth households, which is that there's somebody that's in the household that's 18 to 24, and they have somebody in their household that's under the age of 18. And the third group that it includes is any youth out there in the world that accessed services or were counted during the point in time that was under the age of 18, that was unaccompanied, not with an adult. So youth households include all three. And so households without kids, that is any combination of adults together without children. So it could be singles, it could be couples, it could be groups. This is households with kids. So in that grouping, you have to have somebody that's over the age of 18 with somebody that's under the age of 18 in a family unit. Family defined however they decide to, name it, but that's what a household with kids looks like. Okay, so using those definitions in mind, this is what we have, right? You had 186 of these households that were homeless in shelter, transitional, or unsheltered settings on the night of the point in time in January of 2019. In the summer, you saw a dip in those number of households. Interestingly, you saw an increase in families that were in those homeless situations in the summer, but less households without kids. Interestingly, also, if you look at the comparison with people that were unsheltered, is exactly what I would expect when you have seasonal shelters, is that you had 5 people that were sleeping outside, and then in the summer, that went up to 31. Your veterans went down just a little bit. Your chronic homeless households went down just a little bit, and your youth households, interestingly, increased. Now, it's not surprising to me, the data for the July point in time, what we have traditionally seen across most coalitions is that there are more families that are homeless in the summer than we are able to find in January. And there's lots of reasons for that. One of the obvious ones is that it's cold and that people are more likely to be able to crash on somebody's couch in the summer or in the winter than they are in the summer. So it is not unusual to see more families and more unsheltered in the summer, which is part of the reason we do the summer count. But I want you to look at January 2020. January 2020, you see a spike. Now, if I'm just looking at January, you see a pretty substantial spike here in total number of households. Your households without children went up significantly. Your unsheltered doubled. Your veterans went down a titch. Your chronic homelessness, your folks went from 45 to 76. That's a pretty big jump. And I'm going to show this data to you in a little bit different way in the next slide. So here is looking at your point in time data going back to January of 2016, because one question we get is about trends. So here is the trend over the last 5 years. Your community has predominantly been and continues to be households without children, homeless population. That your primary folks that are experiencing homelessness don't have children in their homes. And that matters in the conversation, because if you have a bunch of programming that is committed to households with kids, but that isn't what your need is, there's going to be a problem. And in the balance of state, we have seen that now over the course of several years, programs that aren't paying attention to their trend data. We had one that didn't. The population was switching from families to singles. They had programming for families, and they didn't make a move. They didn't change. They didn't make some necessary programmatic changes in order to meet the need, and they eventually lost that program. That's exactly what happened. And so it's important to know this is where you're at. And actually, you've become more, the percentage has increased more towards households without children. In comparison to the balance of state, the overall balance of state is about 75% households without children, 25% families. So you're a little bit higher than the average, but you have been marching towards this for quite a while. So just looking at graphs and charts, here's it graphically represented by a pie graph, and then here is looking at the total contribution between households without children and then the families. If I go on to the next slide, this one, we are looking at just households without children. Okay, so this is all about households without children just on this slide. According to your point in time data, this is when we graph it out, looking back to 2015, this is what we see. And you can see a couple of little spikes. So the blue line is your total. If I add all the things together, the red line is emergency shelter, the yellow line is transitional housing, and the green line is unsheltered. So in households without children, you had, you're cruising along here, and then you have from 2016 to 2017, a big jump. You went from 159 people to 189 people in January point in time in shelter. And then the next year, you go back down, 189 down to 160, kind of back where you were back in 2016. I don't have an answer about why that happened. I can just tell you that from a data perspective, there was a bump. Maybe there was more available in emergency shelter. Maybe there was a new project. I don't know what happened. But for 1 year, you certainly had the ability to take in more humans into the shelter system. And then it went back down to where it had been. And then it continued plateauing here, about the same number. And then between 2019 and 2020, we take a big old jump up. You can see that you went up 32% between who you had served in a shelter situation in 2019 up into 2020. Corresponding to that, you can't really see it down here very well because the scale's a little off, but transitional housing had a 6% decrease. Your unsheltered, I mentioned it before, doubled. So you had like 100% increase. For an overall total increase between 2019 and 2020 in just households without children, you had an overall increase in people that were homeless of 27%. Now I'm going to show you the next slide, which is, now here is what this looks like, right? So little bump, plateau, big bump. Now I'm going to show you families, which looks absolutely nothing like the chart I just showed you. So this one, again, same color, right? The blue is total, the red is shelter, the yellow is transitional housing, and the green is unsheltered. So here is shelter. We're cruising along, plateauing. In the same year that you saw a big bump from 2016 to 2017, and then back down in 2018, you do not see any kind of big bump going up here. Instead, you see a big old decrease in 2017 to 2018. And then it's kind of a march back up to where you were before. Not the same trend as with households without children. Transitional housing had a big jump up from 2015 to 16. Again, not the same as what we saw for the households without children. And then it's been at a slow march downward, in a downward trajectory. If we look just at 2019 to 2020, your emergency shelter increased by 23%. Your TH decreased by the same approximate amount. So emergency shelter went up 23%, transitional housing went down 23%, your unsheltered basically remained unchanged. And then because of, rounding, we see a total decrease of about 2%. keeping in mind, so I'm going to go back for a second, this is households without children. Very much not the same than your households with. Okay. Any questions about the point in time? What the data tells us, anything I showed you on the screen before I move on to the next kind of bucket. All right, here is shelter. So now we're gonna launch into the inflow. Who is making it into the shelter system? So a couple things to know on the slide. Number one, where does the data come from? This is HMIS data for this date range. And then on this side, you see I use some comparisons. So here's Brown Coalition. Then I picked the Fox Cities. The Fox Cities obviously includes Appleton. It is an urban area. It's also geographically close to Brown County, so it made sense to include it as a comparison. I included Kenosha and Waukesha mainly because they are other one coalition, one county coalitions that are more urban in nature. And so as a comparison to those other cities in counties, I use those. And then West Central is the oddball in the group. And the reason that I picked West Central is not because it is in any way similar in terms of it includes 7 counties. They are all rural. The largest city in that entire 7-county area is about 14,000 people, but yet they are the 3rd largest coalition as it relates to people that are homeless. It has the 3rd largest amount of people that are homeless behind Brown and then Rockwall, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I use it as a comparison because it's a coalition that has a ton of people that are homeless and has a ton of different shelters similar to you all, and it has a ton of housing resources similar to you all. So I brought them in as a comparison for that purpose. So total clients that have entered the shelter system during this time frame, you can see Brown County certainly has the most at over 1,700 people. If I break that number down into the number of clients that came from households without kids, that's 924 versus the clients in households with kids is 784. So just right there, I want to show you, this is who's making it into the shelter system. Now in the back of your minds, I want you to keep that percentage that I had back there, which is that your homeless population, reflective in the point in time, when we include things that aren't here, right? What isn't included in this chart? What's not included in this chart are survivors of domestic violence providers. So your DV shelters aren't included in this chart. Unsheltered isn't included in this chart. So when we just looked at point in time, which did include those groups, it was in what, 82% to 17%, I think, split between the need, households without kids versus households with kids. When we look at shelter, it's not quite that high of a percentage. Now it's not equal. If you go down to West Central, that one's almost equal. But then if you look at like Waukesha, there's a significant difference. Fox Cities, there's a significant difference. Kenosha is about equal. But if you think and you keep that in your mind, that the point in time tells us there's a much bigger percentage of households without kids that are experiencing homelessness, at least on the point in time, versus what we see right now in your shelter. Now I'm going to keep building on that as we move. Within the families that you're serving, 484 of those folks are kids under the age of 18. 303 of them are adults and families. I go back to the little over 1,700 people that are in shelter. 849 of them have disabilities. 61 of them are veterans. And 41 of them are our older population of age 65 and older. And then you can look down the list, for example, and see where you kind of stack up next to some of these other communities in terms of the number of veterans and the number of the older population. By running or having this kind of report, I can also tell you who the typical client that is entering, who is entering the shelter system. What does that typical client look like? Well, the typical client in the Brown Coalition that is able to get into an HMIS using shelter system is a 38-year-old white male who is not a veteran, who is not in a family, and does not have a disability. That is your typical person seeking shelter or person getting into shelter in the Brown Coalition. Now, when you compare that to the other coalitions, you have Fox Cities, you know, they're at 41. Kenosha is a much younger population at 29. Waukesha's 42, and West Central is about 35. You can see that most of them are also without families, is the typical. West Central slides just a titch to households with kids. And that has actually changed over time, like kind of goes back, it flip-flops back and forth. And then here you have without a disability in Brown, but all the other coalitions, predominant folks that are making it into shelter actually have disabilities. Any questions about this particular slide? Okay. Then we're going to look at this migration information. So we talked about who is in the shelter system. This is the slide that I was referencing that talks about, are the people that are experiencing homelessness in your coalition from Brown County? Are they Brown County people? And the answer to that question is yes. 4,196 of the people that access services originated from the Brown County Coalition. You sent out, now I don't mean like you put them on a bus or anything, but I mean that your coalition was the starting place for 143 people who went elsewhere for services. On the flip side, 119 people came into the Brown Coalition whose homeless incident or situation may have arisen outside of Brown County. So more left than more came in. More left than more came in. And then where did people go, right? Or where did they come from? So the bigger the line, the more the migration. So I broke it down here for you. You know, some of your biggest back and forth is with Fox Cities, which makes sense. Northeast Coalition, you share not only some geography or closeness to geography, but you share an agency in NewCap. So that doesn't really surprise me that there would be some back and forth there. Lakeshore is also geographically close. Lakeshore includes Sheboygan, Manitowoc, Kewaunee, and Door County. And then when we look at what what has happened with the other two major COCs in the balance, so in Wisconsin, there's the balance of state, and then there's Dane or Madison, and then Milwaukee, and then Racine. So in the other two big COCs, your exchange of humans, for example, people have left Milwaukee to come to Brown. 13 people did, versus 3 people from Brown showed up homeless in Milwaukee. Dane and you was an even split. So the majority of the movement is geographically close to you. Any questions about the migration? I think you can see this, but that's the date range for all HMIS programs during that same date range that we've been using, which is October 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2020. Okay, then I will keep on going. All right, so here is the total clients served. This is all people that have, gone into programming with agencies that use HMIS during that date range. This looks, I don't have the exact number, but this looks pretty 50-50. so then I push back and say, but the point in time told us that 82% of, you have 82% households without kids that are homeless. And the shelter inflow showed that 54% who's getting into shelter is 54% households without kids. And now the total clients actually served looks really close to 50%. What's up with that? And I don't have an answer to the what's up with that, but that is absolutely something in your coalition you should be able to wrap your heads around. What is happening with the point in time showing one very significant percentage of human beings that are experiencing homelessness? That is not the same percentage that's showing up and being served in shelters. And I'm not saying they're not showing up. They're just not being served in shelters. And it is not the same percentage of who actually gets into programming. That is something that you should dig into. A big piece of that is the unsheltered population mixed with your domestic violence partners. Because the only place their data can show up, remember, in out of all of this that we've talked about so far, is in the point in time. Any questions? Any comments? Okay, then I'm going to go. Oh, go ahead.
I think as Kai, Carrie, Cheryl, I think we're just going to need to spend some time maybe with systems and maybe, just having some real conversations about this and figure out what does this mean on the ground and kind of what do we see, what are providers at. This is really interesting information. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's the hope, right? Is that you take all of this and then you unpeel it, unpack it, figure it out. That is absolutely what my hope is. I just want to make absolutely sure that when you walk away with the presentation, you A, have had the chance to ask any questions that didn't make sense to you, or B, that there's something I missed that you feel like is necessary for me to better understand. So when I say, are there any questions, it's really just clarification and anything that you think I should know, or the group should know to better inform this information. But thank you. All right, we're going to jump off to the next bucket, which is the biggest bucket, which is coordinated entry. So as I talked about coordinated entry before, it was not always a thing in homeless services. It became a thing, it's required to be a thing, but it wasn't always a thing. You know, once upon a time, we were putting people in housing programs, permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing and transitional housing.
Carrie?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Stephanie Birmingham has a question. She's
Sure.
works with, she has a particular focus on our other abled individuals. She wants to know if the disabilities are, is specific type of disability tracked?
Sure. So disabilities includes a variety of different ones. So I can tell you that it includes people with physical impairments. It includes people with mental health and or AODA or substance abuse issues or disorders. It includes the developmental disabilities, which is defined by disability diagnosed prior to the age of 22. Oftentimes that goes into the grouping of intellectual disabilities along with ADHD and the autism spectrum. It also includes people that have been diagnosed with HIV or AIDS, if that helps. So when I say disability, I'm including all of those. One of the big pieces to the disability component of the conversation is that it needs to be A, of long duration, but B, has to impact your daily life. And that is something to make sure that we're thinking about. You know, there are lots of people in this country that are diagnosed with anxiety or depression, and it doesn't always impact their ability to keep their housing or keep their job. And so what we're talking about when we're talking about disabilities are people who have been diagnosed, it's of long duration, and it's impacting their daily life. Hopefully that helps clarify. Thank you. Looking at coordinated entry, it's important to take a pause for a second to just make sure that we're all on the same page about where it came from, because it isn't always a well-loved thing, and I understand that. I worked at an agency once upon a time where we did business like everybody else, which was we had permanent supportive housing and transitional housing, and rapid rehousing wasn't quite a thing yet, but we had those programs, and we filled those programs pretty much on a first come, first served basis. You know, the first person that was eligible got access. It didn't necessarily mean that they're the program or the person that needed it the most, but they happened to get all their paperwork in on time, or they happened to convince me that they wanted to, you know, they were going to follow all the rules, you know, that kind of stuff. And what HUD did through the Hearth Act was establish an expectation that that's not okay. That doing business like that subjective nature of sharing a very limited resource is not the right way to do business. Because we don't have all of the funding necessary to do permanent supportive housing and all the funding necessary to do
okay?
rapid rehousing to the degree that we need to, because of that, we are not, because we're not able to have just the resources as much as we need, we have to prioritize who is going to get those resources. If, you know, there's an analogy that is often used, and I didn't make it up, but it stuck with me. And part of that analogy is this idea that when we've ever had to go to the ER, that we understand that if I go in with a cut finger and I'm bleeding and I probably need a stitch and I'm probably going to need a tetanus shot or whatever, you know, I have to go to the ER, can't do that at home. And so I'm sitting there and somebody comes in having a heart attack, that I know that that person needs to go first. That person is more likely to die if they are not helped right now than I am with my cut finger. And we get that as humans, for the most part. But when it comes to providing service to people that are homeless, oftentimes we don't make that same connection. That the people that are most likely going to die outside need help first. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that the person waiting isn't also in need. It just means unless we have more resources, we have to put the people that need it the most first. So how do we decide who that needs it first or needs it the most is? Like, how do we decide that? Again, a lot of work went into helping to develop the prioritization package that we use for the different programming. Some of it was led by HUD, some of it was led by other entities. What I can tell you, rather than taking the whole presentation down a definition road, is that for permanent supportive housing, for the long-term intensive case management services, the people that have been determined to need it the most are those that have been homeless the longest and have a disability. Those are the folks that we have decided need to be prioritized. For rapid rehousing, for that program model, the way that we prioritize for that is looking at their needs, which we define through an assessment called the VI SPDAT, but we define that in an assessment number, and that is how we prioritize who gets that service. So that is the system that we have in place right now. And with that, the important part that often gets missed is that if we aren't making sure that coordinated entry is available for everyone that is homeless, then we are not pooling all the people that need it into the same group. And so when we prioritize and we're pulling only from that group, we might be missing people. And that is the part of the coordinated entry system that is super critical to work on at a coalition level, is to make sure that the door to the system is as open and available as humanly possible. That means it cannot just fall to the homeless service providers. It cannot just fall to the people that are doing the housing or the sheltering to ensure that every single person gets access to coordinated entry. It can't, because there are people that are homeless that are never going to make it into shelter. They're never going to make it to those locations. So how do you know, and how can you ensure that they have the same access if they're never going to get into shelter? That's why we need to make sure that everybody has the ability to be a door to the system. You don't have to be a housing agency. You don't have to use HMIS. You can be the police department, a school district, a housing authority. You can be a social worker and have access to referring into coordinated entry. You don't have to have your person have to make another phone call or stop at another agency. We have created a system, a mirror system, to be able to handle those kinds of referrals, giving same priority to everybody else. But you don't have to go through the same door in order to get the same level of access to coordinated entry. And that is the biggest message that I can share, is that since the evolution of the coordinated entry system, the beginning of it in 2014, taking it now forward 5-6 years, what we know is that if we don't expand who is referring into coordinated entry, we are going to continue to miss people. We are not going to be able to get this out and make sure the services are being reached to all the population that needs to have it reached. So that's my little pitch about that's what coordinated entry is. So next up, oh, I just figured out that I know where the chat button is. All right, excellent. So now I can see questions too. Fantastic. All right. Looking at coordinated entry, we have the ability to have data, right? So I pulled, and actually when I say I don't mean me, I mean Ryan, pulled your prioritization lists. He basically does it every quarter and then sometimes more. So he pulled them 2 days ago. So here's your prioritization list, who was homeless in the Brown Coalition 2 days ago waiting for services. This one was pulled in August 10th. And then this one was pulled before the pandemic back in January 10th of 2020. And then you see this green writing here that says spring cleaning. So what happened here about March, April, is that there was a concerted effort to make sure that everybody's list was, I call it cleaning. The other thing, it basically making sure that there weren't folks on the list that needed to be removed, either because they no longer wanted to be on the list or they had found permanent housing. So we made some policy changes to allow for your SSO, which you have in the Brown Coalition, a paid person designed to oversee the coordinated entry system, to be able to help clean up that list. So that happened in March and April. So I put that on there so that, you know, we're all on the same page about that. But if you look at what was happening in August versus what was happening 2 days ago, you can see that you are basically trending at approximately the same pace. 174 people back in August that were in households without kids, and 161 now. 63 family households versus 64 family households. So if I just focus in on what happened 2 days ago from your list, again, if we're looking at the breakdown between humans, I think there's an interesting point to bring up, and that is, back to that other slide, we saw almost equal number of people being served. We saw slight bump in households without children that get into shelter. The point in time tells us the split should be more like 80-20. Coordinated entry pretty much mimics the point in time. It says your split should be about 70-30. 70% of the people waiting for services that have been identified through coordinated entry come from households without kids. 30% come from households with children. That tells me that the point in time and coordinated entry, it would lead me to believe that the point in time and coordinated entry are more accurate representations of the homeless population in your community right now than those other data markers, the inflow into shelter, as well as the total clients served. This is more accurate. It matches historically with what you have seen in your coalition over the last 6 years. So what does this mean? It means that there are 161 people that have been identified as homeless and have been assessed and are on a coordinated entry prioritization list, hoping that they're going to have access to some kind of housing resource. Housing, whether it be, rental assistance, case management, they're looking for something. They've accessed the system, hoping that they're going to get help to not be homeless anymore. 32 of those people are chronically homeless. 4 of them are veterans. 5 of them are between the ages of 18 and 24. The average length of time that they've been on the list is 140 days. And the longest that somebody's been on the list, there is a person that's been on the list for 868 days. That was who is waiting for services 2 days ago in your community. If we look at families, it's 64 family households. 5 of them are chronically homeless. 2 of them are veteran households. The average length of time on that list is only 88 days. And the longest somebody has been on that list in a family household on coordinated entry is 474 days. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Now, we dig a little deeper here and we look at households without children. So this slide is just households without children. And I want to make sure that I make the point here that the buckets that you see, these buckets, right? So here's 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is about need. This is about your population fitting into certain criteria of need. It has nothing to do with the VI SPDAT score. So here's the VI SPDAT score. I tell you who, what range people fall into. But as you can see here, VI SPDAT score does not fit into what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is people that are chronically homeless with a disability who've been homeless more than 12 months. Then we're talking about people with a disability that have been homeless less than 12 months. Then we're talking about people who have a disability who have been homeless less than 12 months. This is more than 12 months, sorry. This is less than 12 months. And those people that don't have a disability but have been homeless longer than 12 months. And these folks who don't have a disability and have been homeless less than 12 months. So if I take your 164 people and I put them into these categories of need, this is what you end up with. 32 people are in that top category of chronic homelessness. 18 people are going to be chronically homeless if they continue to stay on the list. 63, your largest number, is in this grouping. And then if I add to it another 19 people. And then down here at the bottom is 32. Here's your VI SPDAT score range. A point just to share here, because, and I say this because it's often misunderstood, that if you're chronically homeless, that must mean you have a high VI SPDAT score. And that's not necessarily true. The majority of the people in the Brown Coalition have a VI SPDAT score between 4 and 8. You can see it in every category, going all the way down. Look at average length of time on the list. The people that wait the longest are the people that are most in need at this 6.2 months. Along with this area right here, the 7.4 months. And I'll tell you what, these folks are never going to end up in a housing program. They're not. Your programming is designed to serve this top group, and your rapid rehousing is designed to serve this bottom group, with a little bit of resource in this middle, but not enough, not nearly enough to meet this need. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. 92% of all the referrals for households without children came from agencies in brown. This is the breakdown of referrals. House of Hope was responsible for 1, New Community Shelter 24, New Cap 74, St. John's 51, and Salvation Army 1. This is a comparison to the HIC, the housing inventory chart, that shows how many people were in these shelters on the 4th Wednesday of December. Just to give some perspective of the level of referral that we would like to see at minimum from the agencies that are actually providing the shelter services. Now keep in mind, Golden House right here isn't going to show up on this particular chart if they are doing the referrals to the non-HMIS list. That is separate, and we will talk about that in a little bit. So there's a question that I see in the chat that says, if there is a majority of programming or services to serve the top group, how come that number seems so high? That is an excellent question. Give me 2 slides and I will hopefully be able to answer that for you. So this one is just the households without kids. Now we're going to look at the same or similar breakdown for the households with kids. So here's that breakdown. You have 65 households on the list, and here's where they land. 5 of them in the top category, 4 of them that are basically going to age into chronicity, 17 plus 9 in this category, and then 30 down here. Look at the length of time that they wait on the list. Same group for the families that are the longest waiters, 4.9 months. Now, it's not 7 months, which are the households without children, but 4.9 months. Same thing, this is where the referrals came from. Similar, 92% came from Brown Coalition members. This is where the referrals came from. House of Hope 8, New Community Shelter 3, New Cap 47, St. John's 2, and then this is who was in these shelter services. It includes motel vouchers on the night, the 4th Wednesday of December in families. This is the number of families that were served in those programs. So if I take all of this, looking at the need and taking the people that are waiting for services and understanding the need, we can draw some conclusions about what more is needed in the Brown County Coalition. But before we can do that, we need to take one more step and look a little bit deeper at the people waiting for services. Now, keep in mind, these are not people necessarily that got into shelter. These are folks that maybe were in shelter and then left. Maybe they're still in shelter, or maybe they were never in shelter, but were referred anyways. All of that is okay. But the folks waiting on the list break down gender, race, and ethnicity like this, which I think is noteworthy for you to also be paying attention to as we talk about access and equity. Look at the top group. So this is households without children. You're about a 56-44 split between male and female. But in your households with children, you're 86% female. When we go over to race, for households without kids, you're at a 62% white, 25% African American, and 13% American Indian Native American. Look what happens when you go down to families. You go down to families, it's a 30-30-30 split, pretty much. And then non-Hispanic, non-Latino is 96% for households without children and 92% households with children. This is an important thing if you are going to do any work related to racial equity or access. You have to look at who is able to get into your system and then who is being served by your system. And then what are the outcomes for those folks on the flip end? And where does the disparities fall? But you certainly have unlike many other coalitions that I have presented to, you have a lot more diversity, especially related to race, than many other communities do. But you're going to want to keep track of, just because they get on the list, what is the proportion of people that are actually getting served? Is it reflective of who's on the list? Or is there a disparity there? All right, now we're going to jump into what is the crunch the numbers. If I were to wave my magic wand and I would have housing resources for everybody that was waiting on your list 2 days ago, you would need 229 units to solve the homelessness situation for everyone on the list 2 days ago. Within that, it's not all the same. It's not all the same kind of service that you need. You have 59 units that you're going to need of more permanent supportive housing. And if not more permanent supportive housing, you have to figure out how to free up those units when folks are no longer in need of the intensive case management. When we have moved past needing those other services, and instead they are going to need some kind of rental subsidy because they're on a fixed income and they're not going to be able to afford market rate apartments, that piece of the puzzle, you have to figure out how to be able to move them on or move them up. This requires partnership with the housing authority. Unless you have other subsidized units in your community that you can make partnership with, it is going to be imperative that your housing authority is part of the plan. I know that the Green Bay Housing Authority, as well as the Brown County Housing Authority, has participated and been involved in the coalition. It's just really important that when you're making these kind of inner looks at the system, do you have enough movement in the system to be able to get people that are in permanent supportive housing that don't need it anymore onto some other kind of subsidy? Does that flow exist? Because otherwise you need 59 more units of permanent supportive housing, which are expensive. Not just the units, but the case management that goes along with it. Down here, you need 62 more units of rapid rehousing. This is kind of your baseline rapid rehousing where you're checking in, you know, every other week, once a month. Maybe they have minimal barriers. Maybe they have a little bit more barriers in the beginning, and then you're able to kind of help them stabilize, and then they're going to be done with the program. These are not the case management intensive group that we were talking about. These are folks that don't have a disability. They have not been homeless very long. You need 62 more units just for that group. But here's where the problem lies. Over almost half of what you need falls into this group that isn't enough need for the PSH level, but needs far more than the baseline rapid rehousing. These are folks that the rapid rehousing model is fine, but the level of case management has to be more like permanent supportive housing. They have more needs than once a month. They need more connection to resources than once a month. They need more assistance stabilizing than once a month. They need more like permanent supportive housing and to be treated a lot more like a permanent supportive housing case manager. This is the largest group of people in need in the entire balance of state, is this middle group that is being missed and is increasing at an alarming rate. You know, you have 82, your need is 82 units for households without kids and 26 for families. It's a lot. It's a lot. These are folks that either, oh, the middle group. The middle group includes people that have been homeless less than 12 months with a disability, or people that don't have a disability and have been homeless longer than 12 months. That's that mixed group that we're talking about. I don't know what PWD stands for. In the chat, there's somebody that wrote PWD. Sorry, I don't know. Oh, persons with disabilities. Yep. It includes people with disabilities that have been homeless less than 12 months. But it also includes people without disabilities that have been homeless longer than 12 months. Now, down here are these subpopulations. This is looking at how many youth and which level of need, how many people fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, and what is the level of need, and veterans and their level of need. If we had special magic funding for just youth, for just survivors of domestic violence, and just veterans, and those resources were targeted specifically to this group waiting on the list right now, you would be able to reduce the total number of units needed, right? Because it's 229. But if I reduce it by taking out these subpopulations, we could reduce it down to 186. I'm going to pause for a second because I have a small concern that there was a tech issue. Can people hear me okay still?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry. All of a sudden your faces disappeared. I don't know where they went. All right. Anyways, we would be able to reduce you from 229 units down to 186 units. And here's the deal. You do in your community have specific funding for youth, specific funding for survivors of domestic violence, and specific funding for veterans. So then it becomes about making sure that we are targeting why are these folks still sitting on the list if those resources exist? Is there movement within those programs? Is there a need for more funding to support those programs to be able to take on more folks? Those are key questions to have because your community, unlike some others, actually has funding in those three groupings to help target. But the reality is 2 days ago, you needed 229 units of assistance. That's not just housing, but that's the case management funds to go along with it. So that gets at the conversation about right sizing. Do you have the right projects in your coalition? Do you have the right funding for those projects in your coalition? Who is working on landlord recruitment and education? Do you have a housing navigator who is able to help obtain those relationships and maintain those relationships with landlords that is separate from your case managers, whose design is to work with the humans and focus their efforts on them versus maintaining and working with those relationships with the landlords? Those are two different things. I need communities to look beyond the VI SPDAT score and focus on the level of need and match that with the program type. So looking at those slides about the current need in your community, what does that tell you about the resources and tools that need to be changed when we are looking at that? And the reality is COC funding, the funding that comes from HUD to provide for permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, is not going to end homelessness by itself. It can't. It's just one of the tools in your coalition's toolbox. You have to have others. But if you are all working under the same understanding of this is what the breakdown of need is, this is what we're working on, this is where we need to target our resources, and this is the population we need to dig into and understand better. You know, one of the questions is brought up is what's the commonalities among the people in the group that have been homeless longer than 12 months but don't have a disability? Are there other things in common with that group? That's a fantastic question, and you should look into that. Is it because their disability hasn't been documented yet, and that's why they're in that group? Or do they really truly not have a disability, but have continued to be overlooked by the creation of the system? I don't know all of those answers, but that is absolutely a piece of conversation that you should be having. All right, now we're going to jump into the last bucket. Whoa, we're not. First, I have to give you perspective. Here is where you line up amongst all the other coalitions. You are the third largest, and actually, based on this information from the end of January, you actually aren't even as large as Rockwall and West Central. So you all have been playing kind of, I don't know what's that, there's a game, right? Not hopscotch, I don't know. You've been swapping, right? Musical chairs. You've been swapping placement in the top 3. I'm going to go to the next slide just because I want to be cognizant of time. Here's looking at subpopulations. You are in the top 3 or 4 across the board. You have the most veteran homeless households, the most chronic homeless households, the most domestic violence households, and the most youth households. That's why you're highlighted all over the place over here. And here's your non-HMIS. You are absolutely one of the top contributors to the non-HMIS data. It's a fantastic use of that tool. I'm very happy to see that, and I'm glad that that's being utilized. I would love to see it expanded beyond just those that are participating in the FUP program, but the Family Unification Program. I would love to see other doors into the system to ensure that everybody has access to referring. All right, now we're going to cruise to the last bucket. The last bucket is system performance. I promised that I would talk about how much time people are spending in shelters. I had said 44, I was wrong, it's 51. That is the average length of time that people are spending in shelter in Brown County. You can see yourself lined up with the other comparing communities. Fox Cities is much higher, but you're about in line with Kenosha, Waukesha, and West Central. You can also see down here, looking back into time, you know, you're at 51 now, you were at 49, then you were at 52. I mean, so you've kind of ranged. I mean, this was a big year where people were stuck. But for the most part, you're in this range. Keeping in mind the federal goal was 30 days. We all have work to do, but 51 is about your average. Looking here at this particular list, I find interesting. This is the number of people and how long do they spend at the shelter. Your 2 largest numbers, looking both at 1920 and 1819, falls within 2 ranges, 1 to 7 days and 31 to 60 days. So the 31 to 60 days makes sense, right? Your average is 51, so it fits right in there. But what's up with the 1 to 7 days? And that is a really a significant question that you should be looking at as a coalition. If 355 people are entering your shelter system and leaving within 7 days, what's up with that? Where are they going? And did they need to be in the shelter system to begin with? Could their shelter stay been avoided if you would have had a system in place to be able to divert them and support them in whatever housing situation they were in, even if it wasn't permanent, but if they were crashing at their sisters and they can continue to stay at their sisters, could you have avoided entering the homeless service system? Had some other kinds of supports been put in place? We know that it's traumatic to enter shelter. It's true if you're 5 years old, 25 years old, or 65 years old. It is traumatic to enter the shelter system. So where we can attempt to divert that and still provide some level of resource to be able to help people, then everybody is better off. But in your community, and like most other communities, the largest number of people are either in your shelter less than 7 days, or they're in there, the largest number in there for 31 to 60 days. Next system performance metric. And I'm going to take a second to explain system performance because it's complicated. We have 2 different ways that we look at reoccurrence. So this is one way. This says we have all these programs. We have street outreach, emergency shelter, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. When people are in those systems, when they are in those projects, and they leave that project, they go someplace. They either go to another permanent destination or they don't. For those people that are in those programs and they leave the project and they go someplace permanent, within 2 years, they show back up homeless in a shelter that uses HMIS. That is this level of reoccurrence. And in Brown County, almost 40% of the people that leave these projects are showing back up homeless within 2 years after leaving, after they went someplace permanently. You can see that unfortunately you have been in a substantial increase as of late. You jumped up to 40% when you were at 30%. Prior to that, you were at 32%, but prior to that, you were at 27, and prior to that, you were at 15. You've been at a very much a march forward to a higher number. And these are, again, people that have found permanency after they left street outreach, emergency shelter, transitional housing, or PSH rapid.
Carrie?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Cheryl Dietrich. I'm just sitting here listening to you and thinking, and I'm guessing, I wonder if other coalitions are experiencing this as well. What I wonder is this about the cost of housing going up and wages not matching, and so people are ending up homeless, back into the homeless system because their income does not keep up with the increase in their rents? Or is it, or what do you feel? That's my first thought, and I'm sure that's way oversimplifying.
No, but that's a good question. What is the commonality among the people that are showing back up homeless? If you look at, for example, the Fox cities, they saw a little bit of a decrease. Look at Kenosha and the substantial decrease that they have seen. Waukesha has seen a little bit of a bump up, and they're about equal to you guys. And then West Central also saw a little bit of a bump up. So what's up with Kenosha versus Brown? I mean, that's a substantial dip. I don't necessarily know all of the reasons why. What I can show you is different components here that you should dig into. So number one, if you look at emergency shelter, the majority of people that are showing back up homeless are showing back up homeless after they are leaving a shelter, claiming to go to a permanent destination, whether that's with family or friends or their own apartment, with or without a subsidy, and then within 6 months showing back up homeless. That's over half. If you look at your transitional programming, the two largest numbers, 11 people are showing back up homeless after 6 months to 12 months, which could get at what you're describing, Cheryl, as well as this group who are showing back up homeless after a year. 11, another 11. I mean, those are really big numbers. And so in comparison, so I've highlighted them because those are places to dig in. What's up with that? What is causing that? And what programmatic changes and supports might need to be put in place so that you can make a dent in that? Now, you're not going to get rid of reoccurrence altogether. I don't think that's realistic, but I certainly encourage setting goals for your coalition that would drop this number. Instead of going from 30 to 40%, trying to go back down to some, decrease by X amount of percent. Emergency shelter does include motel vouchers. So just to be, yes, there was a question about that. Yes, emergency shelter includes motel vouchers. So I'm going to go to the next slide to further the conversation about reoccurrence, because
Carrie,
this is,
can I ask one question? I'm sorry, just about the emergency shelter including motel vouchers. So if someone moves from a motel into an emergency shelter, is that a part of that 186?
No, it is not, because an emergency shelter is not considered a permanent destination.
Okay.
So this would only be somebody that was in a motel voucher that then went to rent an apartment that then showed up homeless. Or was in the motel voucher and went to stay with their grandma permanently and then showed back up homeless. So there has to be that permanence at the exit that then triggers this report to calculate them showing back up homeless again. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no problem. And I agree with the comment in the chat that case management is critical. There are different levels of case management that are and are available in the different programming that we have. Not just while the human is in the program, but I would go further to say what happens after they've left. What supports are in place for people that run into an oops so that we can prevent them from showing back up homeless? That's a key to this puzzle, because why would we think that they have spent so much time in one of our programs that nothing bad is ever going to happen to them again, right? Like they aren't going to lose their job, or they're not going to have other life events occur. We want to ensure that people leave our programs to be able to say, here is the natural resources that you have available to you. Here are the community supports that exist, and let's make sure that we would be able to dig into that and connect those folks to those community resources. That's an important piece, so that maybe they don't need to come back into shelter. Maybe they just need to make sure that they know who they can reach out to for that support before shelter even comes back on the horizon. There was a question about how do we draw to the root causes of these numbers, exit and reentry assessments. Yes, all of that is important components. What are you going to do? How is Brown Coalition going to support these programs and support these folks to be able to A, dig into the numbers to understand if there are commonalities, B, what kind of follow-up assessments are being done? And if there aren't, how can the coalition support the use of those assessments? Is it realistic to ask agency A to send an assessment out to the clients that have left their place and have them send them back to the agency that provided the service? Are you going to get honest responses? I don't know, but I could see that there could be a concern about providing honest feedback back to the very agency that provided the assistance in the first place. Could there be a neutral party that could collect that kind of assessment to help be able to figure out if there's common, concerns or links or whatever? The other thing I've seen done is that in HMIS, that you can structure the system performance metrics to measure the performance of the clients that are being served by certain case managers. This is going even further to be able to say, is there a case management thing? Is it the humans that are providing the case management? Is it the geography? If you have a large geographic area, now you guys don't, but I've seen it happen where, people tend to reoccur or show back up homeless when they're in this particular county, more so than in this particular county. This is all the kinds of things that you could look into to be able to dig into some of that. Now, this slide was just talking about people that left permanently. This next slide, this one that's up on your screen now, this is looking at the people that exit altogether. These include the people that disappear in the middle of the night. This includes the people that go to temporary locations, that go to jail, that exit and go to sleep in their car. This includes everybody. And when we look at everybody, we can see that you have a 60% return rate. That for everybody that leaves the programs, including prevention, we add prevention to this conversation. They aren't part of the previous conversation. So when we add prevention to the mix too, what is the percentage of return? 60%. You've been sitting at about 60% looking back the last 4-year groupings, right? So you can see that up here. You can also see that you're about average with the Fox cities. You are more than Kenosha, more than West Central, but way less than Waukesha. So just to give you some comparisons here, I also threw down, you can run reports. If you have access to HMIS, you can run a report that shows you the reoccurrence for just your program. I didn't do that for this particular chart by calling out particular agencies. but you can do that. There are ways to look at the exact agency and the exact percentage. I grouped it into buckets. So I said, here are all the prevention programs in your community. Here are all the transitional, rapid, permanent supportive housing, et cetera. And so this is the percentage of return. 12% of all people that have gotten prevention services during this particular range, regardless of how they exited the program, showed back up homeless, 12%. 22% of those that were in transitional housing showed back up homeless. 28% of people that got rapid rehousing services showed back up homeless. And the more concerning number for me, that's why they're in orange, 34% of the people that had permanent supportive housing showed back up homeless. Now your shelters, 66%, motel vouchers, 65%, street outreach, 53%. Those are not surprising numbers. Somebody had mentioned that or asked the question earlier. If you're in a motel voucher and then you go to a shelter, that is considered a reoccurrence for the purposes of this report. Now there's a way that you can filter that out so that it doesn't include that, but in general, yes. So the way that you structure motel vouchers, it doesn't surprise me that 65% would show back up homeless because they're transitioning into a regular shelter. So that to me is not an alarming number. The stuff in orange is the place where that's high. For those kinds of programming, the amount of money that's being used to support those folks, there's more to know there. There's more to look into there. All right, reoccurrence. Here's a little bit more. If you're going to dig into disparities or you're going to dig into any kind of, difference among humans, you can look even further to say, this is the reoccurrence rate among males, 67%. Here's the reoccurrence rate among females, 49%. Here is the reoccurrence for people that are transgender, 82%. That starts to tell us some things. The next piece, households with kids versus households without kids. Look at the rate of return difference there. Now look at the rate of return for veterans. Pretty much equal. In other words, whether you're a veteran or not, you basically have the same chance of showing back up homeless. Your veteran status probably doesn't impact that, at least based on this statistic. Look at race. A similar, this is a concern, and it's one of the first times that I've broken it down quite like this during a presentation, and I'm glad I did, and I intend to do so moving forward, because look at this, 59, 45, 54, 42, but if you're white, it's 39% rate of return. So that, again, when you're looking at disparities and you want to dig into things like equity and access, this is a place to look. Why is this? What is it about being male without kids or transgender? And the highest percentage here is American Indian, Native American. What is it about that leads to this higher rate of return? All right. System performance way of looking at things, number 4 is employment and income. This is looking at how well did the programs do that get COC money at helping people increase their employment and income. When the report was run, if the person was still in the program, they are considered a stayer. If when the report was run, the person had left the program, they're considered a leaver. These are some of the highest numbers that we have in the balance of state. I mean, ideally, they would be much, much higher for everyone, but I will tell you that these are pretty high in comparison to the other communities that have COC funded programs. To have an overall increase in total income of 36% and 41%, that's pretty good. So you're doing something, those programs are certainly doing something right as it relates to making sure people are increasing their income while in those programs. First time homeless. So this particular metric is looking at when somebody enters the homeless system, have they been homeless the 2 years prior? Now, what it doesn't do is say, you know, I was homeless for 10 years in the 90s, and then I was not homeless again until yesterday. So you're going to be considered first-time homeless, even though you have 10 years of homeless experience, again, back in the 90s. But what it does tell us is that 69% of the people that enter your system have not entered the system in the 2 years prior. That tells you something, right? They aren't regular, what do we call, you know, people call them different things like frequent flyers, or, you know, these are the people that keep cycling in the system. I mean, we have lots of ways of describing, or people have ways of describing clients that come back around over and over again. But 69% of them don't. They aren't. Said another way, only a smaller percentage are actually those kind of folks that continue to need help over and over again. So 31% of those people have had a homeless episode prior to coming in. Your percentage lines up with the other coalitions. You know, Fox Cities and Waukesha have similar, but Kenosha and West Central have a much higher first-time homeless percentage. And then looking at yourself, you know, kind of statistically, you've been right around that percentage, 69, 70% for quite a while. I just remind you of that, and looking at these numbers when we talk about the kinds of services and the assistance in navigating these very complicated systems, 69% of them don't know. They don't get it. They don't know how to do that. Maybe they don't use the right words. They are not familiar with your system. All right. Last system performance metric, exits to successful destinations. Looking at your programming, what is the percentage of people that exit the program to permanence? If we group together emergency shelter, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing programs, 39% of the people that leave those program models, exit someplace positive to a permanent destination. Said another way, 60% of the people that leave shelter, transitional, and rapid do not exit to a successful destination. In permanent supportive housing, we include both the people that exit, but also the people that remained in the program, and your percentage is 97.1. And then street outreach, again, how many people are exiting out of street outreach directly into a permanent situation? And you can see the comparison of Brown over time. Your comparison from last year to this year has certainly increased, and that's a good thing. It dipped a little bit for permanent supportive housing, and it dipped significantly for street outreach. Now, if we compare it to the other communities, you know, it's not the lowest in this grouping, but it's not the highest either. Your permanent supportive housing is right on par, and in fact, it's a little bit higher than the others, and that's a good thing. But for those communities that have street outreach, it's a much lower percentage. So that's an area to also consider. Question, does this percentage address mobility of individuals who might be coming from another area of the state and were homeless elsewhere? Are you talking about exits to successful destinations or first-time homeless? Oh, first-time homeless. This is anybody that they showed up at an emergency shelter, transitional housing, and down here includes permanent housing. So that's rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. And we're homeless somewhere else in the Wisconsin HMIS system the 2 years prior. So it's only Wisconsin, and it's only with an agency using HMIS. So if they were fleeing domestic violence last year and were at a DV shelter, no, they wouldn't be included here. That episode of homelessness would not be factored in to this particular metric. Okay, so what does it all mean? I look at the time, I realize that I went 15 minutes over. I do want to wrap up with 2 more slides, if you'll indulge me. This particular slide gets at the questions to consider for coordinated entry besides everything else I just talked about and all the buckets of data. Taking a look with coordinated entry, do you have all the organizations at the table that need to be contributing to coordinated entry and making sure that their clients have access to the system? Social services, housing authorities, school districts, law enforcement. You know, one of the things that is happening in the city of Appleton, I can use as a description, is that the city of Appleton and the police department have an MOU in place so that when police officers encounter people sleeping outside, they are initiating the access to coordinated entry. There's an agreement that they will fill out the basic information and ask for consent and do that initial screening and then share that information back to the city, who then has, in that structure, they are the SSO, they are then able to do the referral into the system. And that person that was sleeping outside that has either been kicked out of shelter, not allowed back into shelter, or doesn't even know what shelter is, still gets access to coordinated entry and doesn't have to wait. There are lots of possibilities of ways to structure this to make sure that people don't have to wait or don't have to go to another place or don't have to hope that they can get into shelter in order to be able to access coordinated entry. How has marketing your services changed because of COVID? People can't congregate in the same way that they used to. And so because they can't congregate the way that they used to, where are they congregating? And do people in those groupings, new providers that are helping, do they know about coordinated entry? Can they help with coordinated entry? Are they referring into coordinated entry? And while I agree with the statement in the chat that street outreach is a lot different now than it was 4 or 5 years ago, the concern always is when we put all the hats in, that's not the phrase, I want to use an analogy. When we put all eggs in one basket, when we assume that street outreach is capable of accessing all of the people that are homeless in a community, that's a lot of pressure on the street outreach folk. So I agree with you that street outreach has intensified and enhanced and is utilizing coordinated entry. I just ask that we consider that other people are interacting with folks that are homeless or at risk of homelessness and could be a direct line into the system. The system has the ability to deduplicate, and it would be fantastic if we were able to, just to make sure, I guess is what I want to say. After our plan, it's important that your community takes a look at that and make sure it's up to date, that if people are found in the middle of the night, that they have reasonable access to crisis services, and most importantly, access to coordinated entry. What's the plan? And then once it's in a plan, how does everybody know about the plan? Are you sharing this with the people that are involved in the plan? It's just important that it's not just on a document somewhere, but that it's a living, breathing part of your system. Other questions to consider, and these are kind of big and systemy, right? Are shelters using problem solving and diversion techniques prior to shelter entry? We talked about the first time homeless. We talked about the number of people that are in your shelter for 1 to 7 days. Is that something that your coalition can adopt coalition-wide? That all shelters are going to do this, not just fill their beds first come, first serve, but ensure that the people that are actually coming into shelter absolutely need it and have no other options. To end homelessness for everyone on your list, you need 229 units. Half of them, or 47% of them, are for this rapid rehousing with more intensive case management. So how is the Brown Coalition going to meet that need? Because you cannot assume that the money is going to come out of the COC world, meaning the COC funds from HUD. There's no guarantee that we're going to see more of that. So what's the plan? How are you going to address this unfortunately growing need? there is a lot of money coming in from the federal government in different buckets. There's the ESGCV money or the CARES money. There's FEMA as a resource to help fund motel vouchers. And now there's going to be this emergency rental assistance funding flowing from the sky. And the point is, has your community had a concerted conversation that says, okay, this is the need for motel vouchers and this is the best way to fund those. So if we engage the city in the use of FEMA funds, because now they're going to reimburse at 100%, can we get FEMA funds to pay for the motel vouchers and then use the ESG CARES money to focus on the shelter needs, making sure they have everything they need to be COVID safe, as well as support, vaccine distribution, and to be able to help make sure that they're doing diversion services and do all the things, and do rapid rehousing. Because see, there's a lot of CARES money, right? And so if we're able to utilize those CARES funds to do those specific things, and we have the emergency rental assistance funds on the other end that can dedicate and focus on all of the eviction prevention and homeless prevention needs that exist, right? All the folks out there that are about to, be evicted, ERA should be able to handle. It's $300 million. So the only group that's really not covered here is permanent supportive housing. And so if the COC money that we have is focused in on targeting permanent supportive housing or very high level needs out of the kind of that rapid rehousing grouping, it starts to look like there are some funding options that start to fill in kind of the border of a puzzle. It starts to fill in the shape. Now, the goal is to make sure that all people that are experiencing homelessness are within that border of the puzzle, right? That everybody's there, and here's how we figured out the needs, and here's all the funding that we have, and do we match all the funding to the needs in a way that makes sense and as a community? There's going to be people that are going to need help that can't be covered under CARES money, FEMA money, ERA money, and maybe not even under COC money. Then that's going to require a bigger pitch to non-HUD people to be able to talk about the financial need that your community has. And hopefully the slides give you a whole lot of places to talk about: housing navigation, diversion, follow-up services, all those kinds of things that foundations and other folks might have the ability to provide support to. Faith-based community, all of that, to be able to support the structure. You have a lot in the slides. What does the Brown Coalition system look like? Being able to dig into that, and what do you want it to be? How do we get there? The PowerPoint presentation was not designed to have all the answers, but hopefully it was designed to be able to to answer questions, and then to pose back to you places where you can jump off and hopefully take this to a good place. The Brown Coalition has substantially one of the largest areas of need in the balance of state. And the success or failure of the COC lies in the ability of the 21 coalitions to end homelessness in their geographic area. So I am absolutely committed to being of whatever help I can, because if Brown County cannot make a dent in the number of people homeless, it impacts the whole. So it absolutely is necessary. And I want to help in whatever way I can. So I want to say thank you so much for having me. I will make sure that the PowerPoint presentation goes to whoever it needs to, and share it. None of this should be a secret. All of you should have access to this so that you're all able to ask questions and kind of look back and reflect on what I said. I know it was a lot of information in 2 hours. But again, I do really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat.